Let's see if we can put our hands on the moral arc of the universe and bend it more quickly towards justice. I think people listened to us. They gave us a shot. But if we don't deliver in the next 2 years, actually deliver real relief and show that we are for working people, I think we'll lose many of those voters for a generation to come.
Hi, everybody. Marianne Williamson here, and I'm really excited about the show today. We have Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal with us. In 2016, I used to do these conferences called the Sister Giant Conferences about women running for office, and she was a newly elected Congresswoman from the city of Seattle. And we didn't know then that she was going to be quite the star that she turned out to be, but we were certainly encouraging her and excited for her. She had just gotten to town and the conference took place in Washington. Well, she has become a real star. And in this coming term, she will be the chairman of the Progressive Caucus in the House. She's also the author, the lead of that Medicare for All bill that everybody is talking about. She takes the lead in so many progressive issues, immigration. She has a great background in immigration, a lot of which she will be talking about on the podcast when we have our conversation. But a lot in her background, I think, is so interesting. She moved to the United States alone from India at the age of 16 years old. Can you imagine what that would have been like for a 16-year-old girl to come alone from India to the United States? She lived in the U.S. for 18 years before getting her citizenship. She's got a BA from Georgetown University and an MBA from Northwestern, and she is the first South Asian woman to serve in Congress. She's only one of 14 immigrants currently serving in Congress. But more than anything, she's got just a blazing heart. She is out there. She is standing for things. Sort of everything that your heart would want her to be standing for if you do wish to see an economic bottom line turn to a humanitarian one. I had a lot of questions for her because we're living at a time, geologists can't tell you when an earthquake is about to occur on the earth. You can't predict earthquakes. But when you're talking about societal earthquakes, yes, you can. And we're about to have a societal earthquake. The ground is already trembling. There are so many things that represent values and dynamics and needs, not just aspirations, but needs of the average American that are not being addressed. Everything from the lack of the stimulus, everything from lack of health care, everything from lack of environmental protection. There are so many issues where Congress is not adequately responding to the needs of the American people, I think, by any standards. And, one of the things I asked Congresswoman Jayapal in our conversation is, hey, for the last 4 years, it's all about, well, we're not Trump. Well, in the next 4 years, it can't just be, well, we're not Mitch McConnell. It's got to be that the Democrats themselves reclaim their own soul and return to the values that traditionally make the American people very clear that the Democratic Party was the party that stood on the side of the average American worker. But I do feel that even though the progressives like herself in Congress are seeking to get the job done inside, something's going to have to change. Because if it doesn't, if the American people don't begin to see that the Democratic Party really stands for them, then we're going to have more catastrophe. That catastrophe could happen electorally in 2022. And if that kind of catastrophe electorally happens in 2024, God help us. So we have to get real. We have to have a serious conversation. And that's what I tried to have with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Enjoy. Congresswoman Jayapal, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm extremely grateful.
I am so happy to be with you, Marianne.
Thank you. I was telling you before we got on that, as you know, I've always been your supporter. I was so excited when you won your first race. You spoke at our Sister Giant conference, but I don't think anybody could have foreseen the way you came out with your heart blazing. And I think there are very few Congresspeople who, at the point of just beginning your third term, are quite the star that you are. You're going to be the chairman of the Congressional Progressive Caucus this time, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about what all that means. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I still remember that conference. It was such a jolt of energy for me to be there and to be talking about love and justice and all that we can and must get done. So I'm grateful for your friendship and for your leadership on the national stage, and enjoyed watching you talk about love all the way through the presidential campaign, too. So thank you for that.
Thank you. You take a bold stand for the kind of humanitarian efforts, the kind of humanitarian values that progressive politics stands for. But now we need to talk about what's going to happen now. During the campaign, you said repeatedly, and I agreed with you, and I said it as well. First things first, we have to get the neo-fascists out of the White House. And there were a lot of progressives, as you know, who very begrudgingly voted for Joe Biden, not because they agreed with his moderate approach to things, not because they felt that incremental approaches were necessarily going to get the job done, and in many cases with deep suspicions. I know that you were a big Bernie supporter in 2016. Progressives are not stupid. They know what happened in 2016, and they know what happened in 2020. But we were told by you and others, and once again, I agree. I said it too. Let's just get Trump out, and then we're going to get it done. And a lot of people right now have some very serious questions about how you're going to do that. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask you. The Democrats, I've never seen in my lifetime such cynicism about the Democratic Party. And that cynicism is not just coming from the right, it's also coming from the left. And I think that any intelligent observer recognizes that the kind of values that the Democratic Party has traditionally stood for are in question in a lot of people's minds, because so often the more corporatist Democratic establishment stands for values other than those that truly support the humanitarian needs of the working class, of the people of the United States. Now, it was all about, we're not Trump. My concern right now is it's just shifting into, we're not McConnell. And it's got to be more than that, because people are not stupid. Your first obstruction is not Mitch McConnell, but I think all of us have a legitimate question. What are you going to do to bore from within? I have seen all these great ideas for your vision for the Progressive Caucus. We have to expand COVID relief. We need to put people back to work. We have to ensure health care for everyone. We have to expand voting rights, get money out of politics, confront racism, stop the endless wars, take on the rigged economy. But Congresswoman, and I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know, there's a big problem here. How many even progressives hear all that and go, yada, yada, yada. How's it going to change this time?
Well, I think, first of all, just going back to how we got here, I think it's really important to recognize that Trump is both a problem in and of himself, but he's also a symptom. He's a symptom of a country that was really divided, unequal, and unjust before he came into office. And a lot of people left the Democratic Party and went to Donald Trump, in part because, as you say, they didn't feel like Democrats were standing up for them. They felt like Democrats had become the party of corporatists, of lobbyists, of special interests, and not standing up for working people. And I think that that is a very important point, because when we talk about what's going to happen with the Joe Biden administration, we have to understand that just going back to pre-Trump is not sufficient. Now, in addition to that, as you and I both know, and I've been doing this work for 20 years as an immigrant rights activist to start, economic justice, civil rights activist for 15 years before coming to Congress. The reality is that we can't say that young people, that folks of color, that so many progressives who don't vote anymore are really part of the base, the Democratic base, because they've left us. And I think in this election, and the reason they left us is because they're frustrated. They're like, it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democratic administration. Now, you and I can disagree on that. I think there is a difference, but not enough of one. Not enough of a difference that people really feel like they are being listened to. And so we had a lot of people leave the Democratic Party by just staying home. That's what happened in 2016 in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, other places where a lot of Democrats just stayed home, or a lot of people who weren't Democrats, but really should be, young people, progressives, Black and brown and indigenous voters, didn't come out to vote because they didn't see us fighting for them. We gave up the mantle on fair trade. Can you imagine, Marianne? We allowed Donald Trump to take the mantle of fair trade from us when we are the party. We should be the party of fair trade, but that wasn't so in the last Democratic administration arguing for the TPP. You know that I have fought against Democratic administrations on immigration for a long time. And we should be clear that Donald Trump was horrific on immigration, but he was handed the tools for what he did by Democratic administrations and Republican administrations that came before. So when it came to this last election, we did have to make a choice. We had to recognize we had to get Donald Trump out, and we needed to keep the House, and we needed to take over the Senate. Really, the way that the Senate has evolved as an institution is not helpful to making any change, any bold structural change happen because of the way the rules have been set. And in order to change those rules, we need a Democratic majority in the Senate. We were able to keep the House, but and so let me just start with the positive. We did turn out a lot of people, and it was you and me and people across the country saying first of all, we had to make Joe Biden's platform more progressive, which we did, most progressive platform in the recent history. But then we had to be the interpreters, the translators, the whisperers to people to say, give us another chance, come out and vote, and then let's see if we can make change. Let's see if we can put our hands on the moral arc of the universe and bend it more quickly towards justice. I think people listened to us, they gave us a shot. But if we don't deliver in the next 2 years, actually deliver real relief and show that we are for working people, I think we'll lose many of those voters for a generation to come. So the question then becomes how. It is much harder because we have a very slim majority. Now, some people who may not follow Congress as closely as we do may think that that gives progressives a lot of power, and it does in one sense, because anytime you have a slim majority, anyone who can command a block of votes has power. But that means anyone. That means the blue dogs, who are the most conservative of the Democrats, also have a lot of power. And particularly if it is a bipartisan bill, that means that Republicans, if you go more to the center or to the right, there will be more Republicans that come along. That means you need more Democrats to counter that. So these are going to be very complicated negotiations. But to prepare, let me tell you what we did. We passed a set of reforms for the Congressional Progressive Caucus for the first time that actually say that if we take a position on a pending piece of floor legislation, then our members need to vote with us 2/3 of the time. That is a brand new requirement that no other caucus has, and that binds us to a concept of block voting. We also have a new set of flagship priorities, if you will, bills like Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, other things. And our members have to co-sponsor 70% of them. The way you move bills through this process is you've got to get enough co-sponsors on there. And so these are the things that we're going to have to do. There's no magic bullet. And I think that it is really incumbent on the movement to understand the nuances, because this is going to be a very nuanced fight. It isn't as simple as just saying, we're not going to do this or we're not going to do that. That may be the right strategy at certain moments, but things have to fall into place in order to do that. Why am I hopeful? Because we did bring in 8 new members of the Progressive Caucus. We have the most new members of any caucus in Congress, and it includes some real superstars, organizers, activists that come from the streets of Ferguson, the halls of public schools, and the courts of voting rights. And so you've got, Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones and Marie Newman. These are progressives that are willing to stand up and fight with us. And so that will be very, very important. But look, the institution is structurally corrupted. And until we get money out of politics and until we pass some of these big reforms, it is much harder to get some of the things done that we need to get done. And yet, if you look at what the Progressive Caucus just did in uniting to say no COVID package is going to pass our House of Representatives with our votes if it doesn't have direct checks in it, 48 hours later, because we took that position, we were able to get direct checks into the package, not as big as we want. And so, these are the fights we're going to have to continue to have. And I just don't want anyone to think it's going to be easy. It's not one vote. It's not one. It's not one ultimatum. It is a constant process because the structures have consolidated power so much in very few people that these kinds of changes are very, very hard. And to do it, you got to organize on the inside and the outside.
I appreciate everything that you've said. And just to be clear, I'm not someone who would ever say that there's no difference between the two parties. I see it as you do. There's a difference and not enough of a difference. You said if we don't deliver in the next 2 years, there will be a problem. I would submit to you, if you don't deliver in the first 100 days, there will be a problem. I'm someone who believes that Joe Biden is going to have to infuse quickly, massively, economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American. And the way I see it, we talk about it in terms of what's happening on the inside and what's happening on the outside. What's happening on the outside is not just how progressives feel, but how the world sees it. And what's happening on the inside, I understand it's complicated. I understand it's nuanced. I understand that it has to do with negotiations. I understand it has to do with corruption of the institution. But I also understand what the American people see and don't see. And sometimes it's not just what you can win, but what people see you even trying to stand for.
Totally. No, that's exactly right.
And I think that there are two issues where, for me, it's so important. One, where every progressive feels so strongly, which has to do with Medicare for all. And secondly, for me, it has to do with the military-industrial complex. By the way, you mentioned immigration rights. I think I've mentioned to you before, my father was an immigration lawyer. My brother's an immigration lawyer. My sense is the Mayorkas was a good choice. Is that your sense as well?
Yes, absolutely. He was somebody that we put forward as one of our progressive picks. He's going to be really good. I mean, that DHS secretary role, honestly, there's very few people that want it because it is such a giant bureaucracy. My personal belief, and I've written about this in an essay that will come out in January, is that the Biden administration should split up DHS and go back to what we had prior to 2001. After 2001, they took immigration services, enforcement, plus all these things on the national security side, put them all together in this giant, unaccountable, corrupted agency. I think we need to split it up again and do it very, very differently. So that's what I hope the Biden administration will do. That will take an act of Congress. And so, that will take some time. But I completely agree with you. When I said 2 years, I meant that in 2 years is going to be the next moment where we will have another election and we will lose the House of Representatives if we don't deliver. And frankly, Marianne, I think if we don't deliver, we will also lose the presidency again in 4 years.
I couldn't agree with you more. And now you're talking about real catastrophe, because particularly if the new attorney general does not choose to really go after the perpetrators of whatever crimes were committed within the administration, then there will not be the fear of serious jail time to deter any of that crowd from doing everything they can to spend the next 4 years.
Right. And you may know that in Judiciary Committee, we have already, started the proceedings to have Don McGahn testify because we're not done. We're not going to let these things go because Donald Trump is out of the White House.
Yeah, I remind people all the time that while Ford pardoned Nixon, and many of us think that was a big mistake, although I think it was well-intentioned, Haldeman went to prison. Ehrlichman went to prison. John Mitchell went to prison.
Right.
No one should be given a pass on what happened over the last 4 years. But let's go back to how things are perceived now. I'm a big supporter of women in politics, women in power, and I certainly do respect much of what Nancy Pelosi has done throughout her career. But I don't know why the codependent protection of Nancy Pelosi takes place the way it does. And I think we need to call it and name it. We did not increase seats in the House. You lost seats in the House. And in any business, this would have been a reason for the CEO to resign. if it had been a Republican. I remember when Newt Gingrich, when they did poorly, he resigned the next day. At least it is the perception, and I understand that, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but it is the perception that Democratic leadership won't let the kids come in. You talk about Jamal Bowman coming in, Cori Bush coming in, Mondaire Jones. We're all excited, but we also see how easily they can get sucked into. It's almost like a pin that progressives are corralled in, and there's this mommy and daddy, Chuck and Nancy and others making sure, you kids, like we're a bunch of juveniles. Meanwhile, the quote unquote bunch of juveniles represent not only the majority of opinion of Democrats, but the majority of opinions of Americans. The majority of Americans want Medicare for all. At least it should be put on the table. And it's not just, to me, the obstruction, not allowing Medicare for all legislation to be brought to the table. I won't forget, and I think a lot of people won't forget, how easily the House passed a national defense authorization, not doing anything to disempower Trump in terms of his behavior towards Iran, not doing anything to disempower him in terms of his behavior towards Yemen. And the American people see, and they're correct to see it, that when it comes to the military-industrial complex, the Democrats are no better than the Republicans. Aren't you going to have to get down in the weeds and talk about these things?
Yeah. I mean, you've raised so many issues in that one. So let me just break it apart a little bit. The only reason we held the states in the presidential and delivered the popular vote, or that we transformed states like Georgia and Arizona, is because of work that was not done by the party, by the way. It was done by Black women, brown women, Indigenous women, people like Stacey Abrams, LaTosha Brown for Black Voters Matter in Arizona. That's been 10 years of organizing. I was there sleeping on church basements protesting SB 1070 10 years ago. And we built that infrastructure to turn out a different set of voters. So I agree with you that the blame on the Democratic Party has been a long time coming in terms of what we do to turn voters out, the way we run elections. That's been true for a long time. I don't think that this particular election, we should necessarily conclude that, anything that happened in this election, frankly, is what's been happening for years. What really happened in this election that had us lose seats is that Donald Trump turned out a lot of voters. That goes back to the policy pieces. So then let's move to the policy for a second on Medicare for All. This time we kept the majority. And fingers were being pointed at progressives for losing these seats, which I also think is just so outrageous that people are saying they lost these seats is because of the defund the police message or Medicare for all, none of which is true. We won this election because of young voters who are progressives, Black, brown, and Indigenous voters who turned out in record numbers. And so I think we also have to think as progressives about how we muddy the message and we don't claim a win. We won. We got the guy out of the White House, that horrendous president out of the White House with the popular vote and with the Electoral College vote for the first time in a very long time. We held the House. And so I just want us to not mix our messages about this being a failure election, which is what happened the day after. And guess who's being blamed for the failure? It's progressives. And so I would say that your point is right if you look at the longer history. There was a time several years ago when Democrats lost the House. That would have been a good time for a leadership change. And you saw the push to have a change in leadership, and that has continued, and it still needs to be there because at the end of the day, what I believe is that there is very little opportunity in the Democratic Party, in the Democratic Caucus, to have any kind of leadership building, leadership transitions. When we passed our reforms package in the CPC, the Progressive Caucus, I put in place a term limit, because I believe that I might love to be chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. I appreciate the opportunity and the honor and the responsibility, but I think other people should do it as well. That is not the case. Republicans have term limits on chairmanships. Democrats do not. We do not have term limits on leadership. We don't have term limits on chairmanships. That is the kind of change that would allow for somebody to challenge any leadership, whether it's Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, or anyone down the road. None of that structure exists. And so I think when people look at what we need to do, the reality is you've got to develop I'm an infrastructure gal. You know that. I started an organization fighting for immigrant rights from scratch, built it to be the largest immigrant rights organization in Washington state. It's why we have some of the best policies. And so I just think that we need more people that are focused on the building of the deconstruction and the reconstruction of the structures that exist, because it isn't as simple as just saying, let's have a vote. If you don't have somebody to put up for a leadership position, and if you don't do the work within the system that exists today, you're not going to get it done. So that's the only point I'm making. I don't disagree with you. Actually, I think we both agree on all of the pieces of what has to happen. I just think that you really have to get more into the weeds of how you change a system that has existed to consolidate power.
If I hear you correctly, you're talking about the consolidation of power within the party itself. And you're talking about the fact that the infrastructure has to change, the system has to change. But I haven't heard you say anything about how that's going to happen. And you say it has to be nuanced, but how is it even going to happen in a nuanced way? Nothing you've said makes me understand how it's even going to happen in a nuanced way. What's going to change it?
These are the pieces of infrastructure I'm talking about. You can say we want to elect progressives, but if you don't have the ability to put money into finding, recruiting, training, supporting, and bringing along progressives so that they can win, so the Cori Bushes and the Jamal Bowmans and the Marie Newmans and all of those people, you're not going to be able to do it. I ran, you might remember, Marianne, in a primary that was a 9-way primary for a seat that had been occupied by a Democrat for 28 years. So there were a lot of people lined up who believed that this was their seat. They were entitled to the seat. I was told not to run. I was told to run for something else. I was told that I wouldn't be able to raise the money I needed to raise. It ended up being the most expensive non-swing district race in the country because, like California, we have a top 2 primary. I ran against somebody who was running on a more, centrist, business-friendly agenda, a Democrat, and I won. But we've got to be able to do that and change the makeup of Congress. Otherwise, we're not going to have the votes. We don't have the votes right now, and that's the thing that people have to understand.
I understand, and I have tremendous respect for you, and I see everything you're doing. You know, I'm your biggest champion, and you said a couple of things just now. You said we have to raise the money for the progressives. You've got Democratic corporatist elite leadership who is actually spending money in race after race to suppress the progressives. It's not just a matter of progressives not being able to raise the money. You've got your own leadership who's going around saying, we don't even want you to run unless you have a lot of money, so you're more likely to get money, people.
But we did it anyway. I'm not saying we did it in every single situation, but I'm thinking about the House. You know, we worked in the House because last time that happened to us, we had the D-Trip putting money in against progressive candidates like Eastman, like Gina Ortiz-Jones, and progressives stood up against that. And those people got close with our help. And this time we were able to get them on the D-Trip's list of red to blue candidates. And we were able to get the D-Trip to commit that they wouldn't run against progressive messaging. Did it happen 100% of the time? No, absolutely not. But this is what I'm saying. Like, we actually made some big inroads. I think we progressives just don't know how to even recognize when we get wins or victories. Yes. But if we're going to keep engaging people, we have to be able to have a vision of what we're calling people into. And we have to be able to celebrate some of the wins. And, you know, I think about the immigrant women who have been living in the shadows, that I've been arrested on the streets of DC and Seattle and all across the country, pushing for immigration reform. They need us to also be able to give hope. And so that's, I guess, I like to come at things from a perspective of ferocity, generous ferocity, let's put it that way. And the ability to really imagine what we have done right and to build on it and to be stronger and to flex our muscles and build courage, because there's not enough people who have it. That's just the reality.
You do display generous ferocity. It's why so many of us absolutely adore you. However, I've counseled people for over 30 years, 35 years. And when people sit in front of me and they have problems, I always want them to remember what they've done right. And I always want them to think in terms of what they've done right and can do right. But I also submit to them that in order to heal their lives and to change their lives, they're going to have to look in the mirror. And the Democratic Party, I understand what you're saying. Well, we have to be positive. We have to see what we've done right. We have to build on what we've done right. But I believe we also have to look in the mirror. And everything that you've said, even though, you said to me, I'm an infrastructure person, and I understand that and I can appreciate it. But if I'm some college kid out in the Midwest, they don't necessarily understand the nuance. They just understand that Medicare for all is not being put on the table, and they don't care why at this point. But they don't.
That last time we got 3 hearings in the House of Representatives, official hearings in the committees of record for the first time in the history of the United States Congress. That didn't happen by just people saying, oh, we should do it. It happened by people mobilizing, putting
So what's
pressure
going to happen
on
this time?
Congress, fighting and negotiating within Congress on the rules package. The reason we got those hearings is because we said we weren't going to have the votes on the rules package. And so we were able to get the hearings committed to, and we got those hearings. We got over 50% of the Democratic caucus supporting Medicare for all. Did you know, Marianne, that before I introduced H.R. 1374, there was no Medicare for all bill? There was a resolution. It was about 18 pages long. It was the one that John Conyers had put forward for 20 years. But there was no detailed bill of how we were going to get it done.
Tell me the plan.
We got into the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force through the Unity Task Force, Healthcare Task Force, which I co-chaired. We were able to get significant pieces of Medicare for all into the Biden platform. We didn't get Medicare for all. We knew we weren't going to. Our candidate lost. All of our candidates that supported Medicare for all lost. So Joe Biden won, so we knew he had put a stake in the sand around the Affordable Care Act. What were we able to get in there? We got a commitment that healthcare would be untethered from employment. That was huge. We got a commitment that any public option would be administered by Medicare and not by a private insurance company. You don't know how big that is and how hard we are going to have to fight for that, because they are already chomping at the bit to get that public option and administer it the way that Medicare Advantage plans, for example, are administered. We got a commitment that we finally tackle long-term care. That was put into my bill for the first time, the giant elephant in the room. We got a commitment that we would eliminate the 800,000 people that are in the long-term care waiting list and create 600,000 new long-term care jobs, mostly, by the way, women and women of color jobs. We got a commitment for the most aggressive pharmaceutical pricing that we have ever had, better than what we passed in the House of Representatives, that any pharmaceutical drug would be negotiated across all payers, and that no American would pay more for their pharmaceutical drugs than they pay in any other country. So we got we got a no deductible plan. I mean, I could go on. I have like 3 pages of what we were able to get. Now the question is, can we get Biden to deliver on those things? We put out in our 6-month agenda that we think there are other key ways to expand Medicare right now that would put us on the path to Medicare for all. What are those? That is dropping the Medicare age to 50. Biden committed to 60. I think we need to go to 50.
Right.
We added covering all kids up to 25. And so if we can get those pieces in, that will be a significant step forward. But in addition, we have gotten a commitment already to do a hearing in the Small Business Administration Committee on the Medicare for All bill. We just got a CBO, Congressional Budget Office, assessment of a single payer system that tells us what we all know, but it comes from the CBO, which is significant, that Medicare for all would cost significantly less than any other system or a single payer system. They didn't say Medicare for all. And so that positions us now to hold a big hearing on that piece to show all the myths that are out there. This is how we have to move it along. Now, the thing that people have to understand is wherever you are, you need to be in those districts where we have Democrats and Republicans who are not co-sponsors of the bill to get people onto the bill. I do not want to have a vote on a bill that is going to fail. So I need to get more co-sponsors on the bill so that I am sure that we can win the vote, because it will set us back years if we have a vote that fails on Medicare for all. That
I
will
hear
be
you.
the end of the movement, where people will say, see, we had a vote and we couldn't get the support for it. So I think that is a terrible strategy. That is not the strategy I want to pursue, because I want to win. I want to win. I want to get health care for everyone, single payer, guaranteed, universal, no private insurance premiums, no deductibles, comprehensive care for everyone, not tied to employment. And I have been working with an incredible movement of people, grassroots, labor unions. For the first time, Marianne, last year, we got something like 23 labor unions signed on. We don't have all of them. That has been a part of our problem, is some of the unions that have their own healthcare plans and have put a lot of money into them. And we haven't quite figured out how to deal with that issue and how to make sure that workers don't lose the money that was taken from their paychecks and put into those systems. So these are the pieces of work that have to happen. If somebody wants to call for us to force a vote on Medicare for all, I am happy to tell you why I think that's a bad idea. It will end our movement. And I
Okay.
refuse to let that happen.
Okay. I appreciate you explaining that to me. I appreciate everything that you just said, and I needed to hear some of that. Let me ask you a question, though. With what you just described, what's your timeline?
Well, we're asking for these things in the first 6 months, right? So, but the Medicare, I mean, what we really want to bring to the floor are these pieces of expanding Medicare, and doing it within the context of the pandemic makes a lot of sense. The AFL, the AFL has been working very hard with some of our partners, our labor union partners. They just put out a statement saying that they're supportive of dropping the Medicare age to 50, where we want to cover kids. If we can get those bills through, and even if it's just contingent on the pandemic moment, that gives us the ability to continue the fight. The hearings, I think the Small Business Administration Committee's hearing, we're hoping to have in the spring, and we're hoping to get the energy and commerce piece going as well within the first year, within the first 6 months. We're already scheduled for a rollout. I believe it's the first week of February for the Medicare for All bill. That will be a big moment for the Medicare for All movement to come together. I've been working to continue to get co-sponsors on. I started a Medicare for All PAC. You might know we've been doing these education sessions to help candidates who run on Medicare for All to be able to fight back against the attacks that they get, millions of dollars of attacks that they get from Democrats, by the way, and Republicans, and also, continuing to work to expand the number of people who are just ready to fight for Medicare for All and win on Medicare for All wherever their district. So those are all the pieces that are going on. But this is all for the first 6 months. We've got a full plan laid out, and we've done it with our movement allies, with our progressive allies. Everybody is on, I shouldn't say everybody, because obviously I know there are some people who would like us to go a different path. But let me say the people who have been most involved in these discussions and in really thinking through the strategy of how we move something along. This is enormous progress for the Medicare for All movement. And it comes because of people around the country who have been continuing to do the hard work of getting their members of Congress on board, getting their city councils and county councils and state legislatures to pass resolutions or to move single payer bills. Another bill that I when I first came in was the state-based universal health care bill. I gave it to Ro Khanna to take over when I took on Medicare for All. But that's another piece that we got into the Biden platform, that we would expand the ability for states to either individually or, as a group, say California, Washington, Oregon, to come together and put together universal health care plans that would be able to access the federal streams of money, because you can't do it if you can't access the federal streams of money.
I understand why Republicans would not want Medicare for All, but given that Medicare for All represents what would be seen in Canada and in most European nations, nothing far left, but simply middle of the road policy, why aren't all Democrats supporting it? Given the fact that the majority of Americans want it, why is this even hard?
I know, it's so frustrating to me too. I think it's the money, it's all the lobbyists, it's the insurance companies that can put 50 lobbyists for every member of Congress in the halls of Congress. And they, I was thinking about, all the charges of socialism, and these cries, the red baiting is really just an effort to limit what is seen as possible, right?
So that just circles us back to the way,
Yeah.
to the Democrats left looking as corrupted by corporate influence as Republicans are in the eyes of far too many Americans. I appreciate. I'm sorry. Yeah.
But when I ran for Congress, I think I was one of only, it was either 4 or 6 members of Congress who refused to take any corporate PAC money. A tiny, I know you're going to laugh at me for always being the glass half full here, but now there
I
are
love your line, ferocious generosity, generous Rob. I'm with you.
Like 70 members of Congress or 75 members of Congress who don't take corporate PAC money, right? So we've made progress, but we have a lot more to do. And that's why, our democracy reforms piece, and I have a great bill with Elizabeth Warren, anti-corruption bill, that is all about ending this revolving door of lobbyists. There's so many things that many of our Democratic colleagues have become, have lain down to.
Well, as long as we're talking about revolving door, what about Lord Austin? I mean, this is not how Democrats should be behaving. We should not be talking about what is Congress just going to pass laws, and anytime that the law is not convenient, say, "Oh, we're going to give a waiver," and just normalize that somebody's on the board at Raytheon is put up by Democrats to head the Pentagon, and then you expect people not to be cynical. Not you personally.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that this has been a concern to me, Lloyd Austin, on 2 levels. One, the waiver, which I think, I voted no on the Mattis waiver. I just don't think we should be voting yes on these waivers.
No, you shouldn't be.
That, that we have that rule in place because we want to have civilian control of the Pentagon. And I think it's an important rule. And so I'm, and I feel like what's happened now is a lot of the foreign policy progressive establishment felt like the choice was between Flournoy and Lloyd Austin. And so they're sort of saying, well, we have to give the waiver. But I mean, this is a movement-wide issue. And I have deep concerns about that waiver. I understand that he's got good views on some things, but I have concerns about the revolving door on many of these people. And we pushed very hard to have a strong set of ethics considerations, which, Norm Eisen and others who worked with the transition team feel that those are very good. And yet we're seeing these nominations that violate that. So I think that's a significant problem.
It flies in the
by the way, about Deb Haaland being nominated to be Interior Secretary.
Yes, I think that's wonderful. It's it's the first appointment that I jumped up and down with a big yes. So I agree with that. It's wonderful. I feel that Janet Yellen is a decent.
I do too.
Choice.
Janet Yellen worked with me on my Paycheck Recovery Act, which had we done that, Marianne, back in the spring when I introduced that bill, we would not have unemployment at the levels we have. Mass unemployment is a policy choice. And we chose unemployment because we didn't do what Europe and parts of Asia did right after the pandemic hit. They immediately had the government go direct. No banks. The government goes direct from Treasury to the business to keep workers on payroll and in their benefits. That would have prevented this kind of mass unemployment that we have. But Janet Yellen was very helpful with that. So I think that was a good pick. I think Javier Becerra was
excellent pick
as well. He's obviously a big supporter of Medicare for all.
Yes.
So I think that's good. Catherine Tai as trade representative, worked a lot with her. She's been good. But there are a couple of big positions left that I really want to see progressives in. Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Education. Those are 2 big ones that are still outstanding.
And when you were talking a minute ago about the fact that mass unemployment is a policy choice, poverty in the richest country in the world is a policy choice.
Yeah, I just tweeted that. I don't know if you saw that. Like 3 days ago, there was an article that came out that from the UK, I think, that looked at 50 years of economic policy and tax cuts and so-called trickle down economics. And I tweeted that, and they basically concluded, as we all know, that trickle down economics doesn't work, nothing trickles down, and that if you tax the rich in the pandemic, nobody should be worried about that being a problem, that it's not going to slow down the economy. So I tweeted that article and said, poverty is a policy choice.
Well, I tweeted the article as well. This massive transfer of wealth into the hands of 1% has been going on for 40 years. We don't need some massive study over 50 years to show what everybody knows. Between the tax cuts, between the corporate subsidies, between allowing the big pharmaceutical companies to get away with what they've gotten away with. This is so obvious. The corruption is so obvious. And if it's okay, I don't want to leave this conversation quite yet about the Pentagon and about Lord Austin. And for people to realize it's not just a revolving door. It's a revolving door from Raytheon. At what point do we stop normalizing this permanent war footing, this permanent militaristic machine, and that we have now given to the Republicans, the idea that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't always be fighting everywhere? And this is, as you probably know, I've made a big stand around the idea of a Department of Peace. You've got a $760 billion budget for your Pentagon. You've got a $40 billion budget for the State Department. That all peace building efforts, USAID, they get 17 billion here, a few million there. The Pentagon gets 760 billion. No matter what, you made sure, not you personally, but they made, including Democrats, made sure the Pentagon got what they needed the other day, while we have children who are hungry.
Yeah.
And this is a crime.
It's a crime. And this has been something I've been so strong on ever since I was one of the organizers of the war against Iraq, just going back to 2001. And I just feel that this narrative that we have to invest in the Pentagon in order to keep national security is just so wrong. It's so tired. It makes no sense at all if you look at the waste, fraud, and abuse that happens within the Pentagon. So I've hammered on this in the budget committee. I don't vote for those budgets. I'm very clear about the fact that I don't vote for those budgets. We have been in the Progressive Caucus. It's been a big priority for us on foreign policy, and specifically on cutting this waste, fraud, and abuse and these slush funds, the OCO slush fund, these forever wars. The American people are with us on this, Marianne. Why do we keep pouring money into these defense budgets and endless wars? And by the way, the other piece of the money puzzle is the accountability piece. Congress is supposed to be voting and giving authorization on use of military force. And it has become, across Democratic and Republican administrations now, the case that Congress isn't even consulted. We saw the Republicans use, but so did Obama, the 2001 authorization of use of military force that we've been trying to repeal for a very long time. So, I mean, this is a big, big problem. And I get up every year and I have, a series of amendments around reduction of cutting the nuclear budget, cutting the Pentagon budget. I'm always on the floor speaking about it. And the Republicans get up and say, oh, she doesn't care about national security. And I say, don't separate the national security relationship to how people in our country can live. We have people, the highest number of people in poverty, the highest number of people without health care. We have people who don't get education. So don't tell me that we're going to put all this money into defense contractors and cut it from education, from transportation, from housing, from all the things that people need to really have security. That is our biggest national security threat, is the lack of domestic spending on the things that people really need.
Well, absolutely. And what you just said, though, you said, I say these things, and then the Republicans say, it's not just the Republicans. It's not just the Republicans. So this is where I think a lot of progressives are wringing their hands. Obviously, Congresswoman, we see you as a great leader. And it still deeply concerns me that I don't think we have a lot of time. And you and I both know that the Trump forces, like you said, he is just a symptom. The disease is still there. I mean, you can just see it. They're still going to be out there. And in many ways, they're going to perfect their game.
Yeah.
And one
Well,
thing about the Republicans, they know how to rebrand. They know how to change. They come from the private sector. And if the Democrats don't give some shock to the system of the way we operate as well, we're going to have a big problem in 22, and we could then have a catastrophic problem in 24.
That's what we're aiming to do, and I never intended to run for office because I don't really. I had my own doubts about politicians for a long time. This was not something I sought out for the title or anything else. It's because I thought we needed to make a change, and I'd rather have us sitting at the table than not being at the table. There are many things we've been able to do at the table. So listen, I recognize how tough this is for everybody, for all of us who know what the just path is forward, and who also know the history of people who have fought for so long against systems that are even bigger and more oppressive. Sojourner Truth, fighting, around slavery, around the right to vote, around so much in our history. And so that's what I go back to, Marianne, every moment is I'm glad we're at the table. I know that change cannot come fast enough because we are a country that does not suffer from scarcity. We suffer from greed. And Democrats and Republicans are party to that. And so our job has to be to put out a different vision, to do the work, the organizing, and not give up, and not allow ourselves to be despondent, because I don't think that Sojourner Truth ever was despondent in spite of what she fought against. And those are the heroes for me, and that's what I go to every time. That keeps me going in these tough moments.
My sense is that she did get despondent, and yet she got up the next day to fight another day. The abolitionists had plenty depressed days, and did the women suffragists.
Stop her.
No, didn't allow it to stop her, and it's not going to stop us. I just want to say once again, not only that I personally am such a fan, but it's just marvelous to see how so many millions of Americans see you as a leader, know you as a leader, not only on Medicare for all, but on all of these issues where we're seeking to change from a greedy economic line to a humanitarian bottom line, which will really allow the function of government, the powers of government to be used on behalf of the American people so that people can thrive. You're doing your part. And I thank you so much. Thank you for everything you're doing in Congress. Please keep it up. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I'm deeply grateful.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Wonderful to be with you. And you stay safe and well, and keep doing what you're doing. We need you desperately.
Thank you so much. Okay, so that was my conversation with Congresswoman Jayapal. I hope that you enjoyed it. It's a difficult conversation because, like she said, she feels sometimes people just feel like, well, we just want it to get done. And I am someone who feels sometimes like I just want them to get it done. But I also understand her point about the institutional corruption, about the nuances, about the incremental changes that are simply part of the way Congress works at certain times. It's a tough one. And I certainly wish her well. And I know that she's certainly trying her best, and I'm a huge fan. Okay, so it's time for Ask Marianne. Remember, if you have questions, you can write to me at marianne@castmedia.com, and I will try to take yours. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Now, this is from Christina, and there are 2 emails that I'm going to read. Okay, dear Marianne, I work for a right-wing conservative lawyer who is a famous talk show radio personality and podcaster. I supported your presidential run wholeheartedly and would never have imagined being in a situation like this. I wanted to work for him to learn more about right-wing views, and am now regretting my decision and want to get out of it as quickly as possible. Like many people, I was laid off from my job when COVID happened. For many weeks, I was unemployed and living with the parents of my life partner. These people were emotionally abusive to both of us, and eventually I got a job delivering prescription drugs part-time to start saving up some money to get out. When the father ended up being aggressive towards my partner and I, we decided to make our move to get our own apartment, even though we only had my part-time job and my partner's savings. I applied to so many jobs as we were moving out. And when I saw a listing for a law filing clerk position, I applied and got called in for an interview. It wasn't until I got there that I found out he was a famous talk show host on the radio and had a podcast that was popular with conservatives. It was a shock because of how badly I wanted the job before I got there, and I was disappointed after learning what it really was. Then I thought, well, maybe it would be a learning experience. I would see how the other half lives, and it could inform my understanding of this country. So I agreed for a second interview, and soon I got the job. So I've only been working there for a week, but every day I go into a world of alternative facts, where Newsmax is playing in the background, people cheer at Trump and Giuliani on TV, and I'm told the latest about the stolen election. I'm not required to wear a mask, and I'll be honest, I've taken it off in the office because of feeling like I'll be looked down on. They don't believe in wearing masks. They think Gavin Newsom is a tyrant, and they want him recalled. I was told before I was hired my views were allowed and I could speak my mind about them, but I don't feel that when I'm there. I've laid out my stances on things, but the force of their beliefs makes it feel useless to try to speak to. So I remain quiet in that respect, especially to my boss. I don't mind people having their views and beliefs that are different than mine, but the problem is in the practice of them. The way they don't care about people dying from COVID or think it worth having a mask mandate and lockdown and think that herd immunity is the only way is scary to be around. One of the other lawyers is a liberal, and she has been in quarantine since March, so I've never met her. But my boss announced in a very glib way yesterday that she just tested positive for COVID despite all the things she did to protect herself. It disturbed me that he would be so happy that someone he works with getting COVID who was trying to stay safe. And today I was invited to the holiday party my boss is having in his home. That sounds nice, but then I remembered that small gatherings were not allowed right now due to the extra lockdown measures Gavin Newsom has put in place. I even told them I wasn't going to go to any gatherings right now because of COVID, and they got really quiet when I said that. I just wonder how a lawyer can be asking me to go against the lockdown right now. That's wrong, but I don't want to lose my income. I just got an apartment and I need to pay the bills, but I don't feel safe at all. So I think I will be looking for another job, even though I said I would commit to a year. I'm so stupid. What did I think was going to happen in this place? I've been there. That was me. There's so much unprofessional behavior happening here, even though I'm doing my best to do an exceptional job. I've had the hardest time standing up to it. For instance, the guy who was training me took me aside and told me that a woman being interviewed there had big boobs. So she probably was going to get the job, saying that my boss had a thing for big boobs. I was outraged at that and let him know he should keep that to himself because he never knows who will sue. But I felt like I didn't do enough about that, and my boss would not be sympathetic to knowing what happened. Well, I don't know if this is interesting to you, but I've definitely learned a few things from this so far. This is just another situation I will have to navigate with the help of God. Thank you for reading this. I'm sorry if it's not that well written. Christina, it was very well written, by the way. But hey, if you ever need anybody to work for you, I would do it for free. First of all, but I would do it with my whole heart. That was very touching, actually, Christina. God bless you. Thank you, Christina. And now there's a second email from Christina. Hello again. In regards to this previous email, I wanted to share that I quit my job the following day. I spoke to my boss directly and I told him the things I wrote to you here. I explained that the way he was running his firm was not right and that he was supporting views I felt were putting my life and this country at risk. I feel proud about stating my views to him and how I did it. And to me, I felt I was standing up for myself and for this country. Anyway, I thought you should know that I don't see myself as a victim and that even though I have to find another job, I'll be okay. Thanks for listening. Best regards, Christina. Wow. Christina, that was very touching. And I'm very, very moved that you wrote to me. And I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to read your letter to people because This is what's happening in this country today. We all know it. And I think it was very helpful to hear this kind of testament from someone going through what you have gone through. We're living in a state of cold civil war right now in this country, and it's very sad. President Eisenhower said that the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative, and I believe that. There are high-minded liberal values and high-minded conservative values. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, a kind of yin and yang. Nobody has a monopoly on truth. You always want to hear intelligent views in the marketplace of ideas, even those who don't agree with you, and that's how we all learn. But this stuff is wrong. When somebody has to go into work at a place. And especially, one of the things, and I'm sure that I'm not the only person who, in listening to Christina's letter, felt this so strongly. Christina was in that office because she was desperate for money. That's where the first problem comes in. The fact that we're not doing what almost every other advanced democracy is doing, which is providing the stimulus checks that will allow people to make it through this situation. Christina is like millions of people in the United States today, going to work in situations that could be harmful to her health because she feels that she has to. It is horrifying what's happening. But I understand, Christina, how it would have been just emotionally too difficult for you to remain there. I can't say you did the wrong thing or the right thing. You did. I mean, I'd love to say you did the right thing because you did do the right thing, but also I wouldn't tell you did the wrong thing if you stayed there because I understand the financial necessity that many people feel in situations like yours. We have to get back to an America in which some of us are liberal, some of us are conservative, some of us are more the left, some of us more the right, but none of us have views that are potentially dangerous to the people that we work with and to other people in the country. To me, the significance of that letter from Christina was that it speaks to a moment in time. And my fervent hope is that we're going to be leaving this moment behind us very soon. I'm hoping that with a new president, I'm not naive enough, and I'm sure you aren't either, to think that all of our problems are going to be behind us now because we have a new president. That's not the way I'm seeing it. But there's a tenor of hostility in the air that I hope will begin to dissolve in the hearts of people on the left and the right. The toxicity, let's hopefully leave it at the door. And I hope that the scene that was described in Christina's letter will be looked back on as the kind of thing, just kind of like we look back at the McCarthy hearings and we look back at a time when there were these, it was the communist scare. And we go, oh, thank God that period's over. Let's hopefully look back one day at a letter like Christina's and go, wow, that must have been a tough moment to be alive. Thank God that's over. In the meantime, Christine, good on you. And I don't know about right now, but you will be in touch with us because you sound great. And then I look forward to hearing from you further. Okay. That was our show today. Thank you so much. I want to remind you that you can ask me a question. You can go to Marianne at castmedia.com if you yourself have anything you'd like me to cover, and that's cast with a K. If you are enjoying the podcast, I would appreciate your rating it and reviewing it on iTunes. That will help me stay on the air. And check us out on YouTube. Tell your friends about it. I want to say thank you to Lauren Selsky, to Wendy Zoller, to Amanda Elliott, to Kaylon Rushing, and to everyone at Cast Media who makes this possible. Also to my adorable daughter, India. To all of you, thank you so, so much. And I hope that you feel that this conversation today was one that mattered in your life, that in some way illumines your understanding, uplifts your energy, makes you think more deeply about some things that we all know we need to be thinking deeply about because we're living in very serious times. Much love. Until next time. See you later.